The wind had a way of talking before a storm. Not the low murmur that came with autumn rain, but a high, keening pitch that climbed the valley walls and rattled the aluminum chimney cap on the wood stove. Sarah heard it first, standing at the kitchen window with her coffee cooling in her hands, watching the Douglas firs sway against a sky the color of old iron. December in the backcountry always carried warnings, if you knew how to listen. This particular morning, the wind spoke in syllables that made the hair on her forearms lift. Behind her, the checklist wall covered the better part of the west-facing interior 4x8 sheet of melamine. Whiteboard flanked by laminated task cards clipped to hooks, each one marked with grease pencil and Tom's neat block capitals. Water system check. Generator weekly load test, wood stove inspection. Radiocom schedule. The neighbors had laughed about it in October, when Doug and Marissa from the next property over had stopped by with a six-pack and seen the wall for the first time. "You running a space mission out here?" Doug had joked, his breath fogging in the unheated mudroom. Marissa had taken a picture with her phone, shaking her head. "You two are adorable. It's just winter, not the apocalypse." Tom had smiled tightly, the way he always did when people mistook preparation for paranoia. Sarah had changed the subject, offered them dinner, kept the evening pleasant. But after they left, Tom had stood in front of the wall for a long time, arms crossed, staring at the grids and columns. "They don't have to get it," he'd said quietly. "We do." That had been 2 months ago. Now, 3 days before Christmas and 72 hours before a weather system the forecasters were calling historic. The checklist wall was no longer a quirk, it was a lifeline. Sarah turned from the window and tapped the whiteboard with her knuckle. "Tom, you listening to this wind?" He was on the floor by the wood stove, splitting kindling with a hatchet on a scarred oak round, each strike precise and controlled. Chips scattered across the floorboards. He paused, head cocked, and nodded slowly. "Yeah, picked up in the last hour. Barometer's been dropping since midnight." He set the hatchet down and stood, brushing wood dust from his jeans. "You checked the forecast?" 3 times. National Weather Service updated it at 5 a.m. They're not hedging anymore. Arctic front, moisture collision, sustained winds 40 to 60, gusts to 80. Starts Sunday night. 12 to 18 inches in the first wave, another 8 to 12 Monday. Whiteout conditions. They're using the word paralyzing. Tom crossed to the wall and ran his finger down the timeline grid. Friday morning, 72 hours. He uncapped a grease pencil and wrote Blizzard PREP72H in the top corner, bold and unmissable. Then he looked at her, and she saw the shift in his expression, the calm that settled over him when the stakes became real. "Okay, we do this right. No shortcuts, no assumptions. We go through the wall, line by line, and we fix what needs fixing before we can't." They'd learned that lesson the hard way. 3 winters back, in a different cabin farther south, a cold snap, not even a full storm. And they'd skipped a flu inspection because they were tired, because it was late, because they'd probably get to it next week. The backdraft had filled the cabin with smoke at 2 in the morning, and if Sarah hadn't woken to the smell, if the carbon monoxide alarm hadn't screamed them awake 10 minutes later, they wouldn't have made it to spring. The memory still lived in her chest, that sick, dizzy terror of stumbling outside into sub-zero air, choking and shaking, realizing how close they'd come. After that, the checklist wall wasn't optional, it was doctrine. She pulled the first laminated card from its hook, comms and warning systems. "Let's start here. If we lose contact, we lose the weather updates. If we lose the weather updates, we're blind." Tom nodded and moved to the corner table where the radios lived to handheld VHF units, ACB base station, and a small shortwave receiver they kept tuned to NOAA weather bands. He powered each one on, checking battery levels, squelch settings, channel clarity. The CB hissed with static. He keyed the mic. "Break, break. This is K7 Tango at Ridgeline, radio check. Anybody copy?" Silence, then a crackle. "Ridgeline, this is Marissa, we've got you." Little scratchy but readable. Tom's eyebrows lifted, surprised. "Copy that. Marissa, you folks monitoring for the storm?" "Doug's got the radio on in the garage, figured we'd better." That forecast's got us a little spooked. Honestly, Sarah leaned toward the mic. "Marissa, hey, it's Sarah. You guys stocked up? Water, heat, all that?" A pause. "We've got some firewood. Doug's gonna run to town later for supplies." We're good, probably." The uncertainty in her voice was audible even through the static. Tom met Sarah's eyes. Later, 72 hours before a historic blizzard, and they were planning a supply run for later. He kept his tone neutral. "Copy. Listen, if you need anything, advice, tools, whatever, we're here. But I'd move that town run to today if you can. Roads are gonna get bad fast." "Noted. Thanks, Ridgeline." Marissa, out. Tom hung the mic on its clip and turned back to the wall. "Communication check. Good. But we need to schedule regular check-ins. If someone gets in trouble, we're the closest help. And their hours." He wrote radio schedule 0800, 1200, 1800, 2200 on the board. "Every 6 hours, starting now. We keep the handheld VHF charged and clipped to the belt at all times." Sarah added it to the active task list. 1 system locked in. 17 more to go. The generator was next. It lived in a plywood shed 30 yards from the cabin, a diesel Kubota that fed the battery bank and backed up their limited solar array when the clouds settled in for weeks. Tom suited up insulated Carhartt overalls, wool cap, gloves and trudged out through 4 inches of old snow, breath steaming. Sarah followed with a checklist card and a clipboard, documenting everything. Tom opened the shed and the smell hit them first: diesel and metal and cold engine grease. The Kubota sat squat and green in the dim light, oil-stained and reliable. Tom pulled the dipstick. Oil's clean, levels good. He checked the coolant reservoir, the fuel filter, the air intake screen. Then he hit the glow plug and cranked the starter. The engine coughed, shuddered, and caught, settling into a rough idle that smoothed out after 30 seconds. He let it run, watching the voltmeter on the shed wall climb, checking for vibration, for smoke, for anything off. Sarah scanned the fuel drums in the corner. We've got 40 gallons diesel on hand. At winter consumption, that's 15 days continuous runtime. More if we're smart, not enough. Tom killed the engine and crouched by the drums, unscrewing the cap on the nearest one. He dipped a clear plastic hose into the fuel and drew a sample, holding it up to the light. The diesel was slightly cloudy. He swore under his breath. What is it? Paraffin wax. Starting to gel, he swirled the sample tube. Temperatures hovering right at the edge. Once we hit 10 below, this fuel's going to thicken up and clog the lines. The generator won't run, and we'll be on battery alone until it warms up, which could be never in a blizzard. Sarah felt the first cold twist of what if in her gut. What do we do? Tom stood, pacing, thinking. We treat it now, before it gets colder. He crossed to the supply shelf and pulled down a gallon jug of diesel anti-gel additive, bright red and warning labeled. This drops the gel point by 20 degrees. We dose all the fuel, remix it, let it homogenize. We also move the generator inside if we can. Inside, it's a diesel engine. The fume's not inside the cabin, inside the mudroom, or under the top alcove, somewhere with 3 walls and a little residual heat. If we can keep the engine block 5 degrees warmer, it buys us operational margin. He was already calculating, already moving. We treat the fuel first, then we relocate the machine, then we test it under load for 30 minutes. We don't guess. We verify. They spent the next 2 hours on it, measuring additive into the drums, agitating the fuel with a paint mixer on a cordless drill, hauling the generator on a furniture dolly over frozen ground to the mudroom's south-facing alcove, rigging an exhaust extension to vent outside. Tom tested the engine 3 times, each time longer, each time monitoring temperature and draw. When he was satisfied, he marked generator winterized, relocated on the checklist wall. Sarah stood beside him, arms folded, staring at the words. If we'd skipped that, if we'd just assumed the fuel was fine, generator would have died the first night of the storm. We'd have been on battery until the solar came back, which in a blizzard might be 3-4 days. No water pump, no lights after dark, no way to recharge radios. Everything downstream fails. He capped the grease pencil. That's why we check. By evening, the wind had shifted to the northwest, and the temperature dropped 8 degrees in an hour. Sarah pulled on her parka and went outside to walk the property perimeter, doing a visual sweep: snow depth markers, tree lean, anything that might become a problem. The light was failing fast. The sky bruised purple and yellow at the horizon. She could taste the storm coming now, metallic and cold on her tongue. When she came back inside, Tom was at the wall again, staring at the next row of tasks. Water system integrity. His jaw was tight. What's wrong? He tapped the card. We're pulling water from the spring, quarter-mile uphill. Line runs buried 18 inches deep. But in a cold snap like this, frost depth can go deeper. If the line freezes, we lose pressurized water. If it freezes and then cracks under pressure, we lose the line entirely. He rubbed his face. We need to check the intake, verify flow, and insulate any exposed sections. Tonight, before it drops below zero. Sarah checked her watch. 6:30 p.m. full dark in an hour. Then let's go. They geared up headlamps, insulated gloves, thermoses of hot coffee, and hiked uphill through the trees, following the buried water line by memory and marked stakes. The spring was a concrete vault sunk into the hillside, sealed and screened, with a half-inch polyethylene line running down through a trench to the cabin. Tom pried open the vault lid, and the sound of running water echoed inside. He shone his light down. The water was moving clear and fast, but the air temperature inside the vault was barely above freezing. Flow's good, but it won't stay that way. He crouched, tracing the line where it exited the vault. This section, first 20 feet, it's only 12 inches deep. I remember we ran out of gravel that day and didn't backfill it right. It's the weak point. Sarah knelt beside him, pulling the checklist from her pocket. So we insulated, foam sleeves, reflective wrap, whatever we can. They worked by headlamp, cutting rigid foam pipe insulation to length, wrapping the vulnerable sections in layers, then covering the whole thing with reflective bubble wrap and tamping soil and snow back over the top. It took 90 minutes, their hands numb and clumsy by the end, but when they were done, the line was protected. Tom tested the flow at the cabin faucet. Strong, steady, cold, good. He marked waterline insulated vulnerable section on the board. That would have been a silent killer. We wouldn't have known until the tap ran dry, and by then the line would have been frozen solid. We'd be melting snow for water, rationing every drop, and if the pipe cracked, we'd have no way to fix it until spring thaw. Sarah poured them both whiskey. Neat, and they stood in front of the checklist wall, breathing hard, warming their hands around the glasses. The wall was filling up with completed tasks, green check marks in grease pencil, but there were still so many blank lines, so many ways this could go wrong. Outside, the wind howled louder and the first flakes of snow began to fall small and dry, the kind that meant serious cold was coming. Tom set his glass down and pulled the next card. Heating system safety, carbon monoxide risk. We do this one before bed, he said. No exceptions. The wood stove was their primary heat source, a cast jottle that could burn for 8 hours on a full load and throw heat into every corner of the cabin. But a dirty flue, a blocked intake, a malfunctioning draft, any one of those could turn the stove into a death meth trap. Tom pulled on a headlamp and a dust mask and opened the stove's loading door. The firebox was full of ash and charred wood. He scooped it out into a metal bucket, then grabbed a chimney brush and climbed onto the roof. Sarah stayed inside, watching through the ceiling hatch as Tom's headlamp bobbed above. She heard the scrape and clatter of the brush working its way down the flue, dislodging creosote and ash. The debris rained down into the stove, and she swept it into the bucket. When Tom climbed back down, his face was streaked with soot. Flue's clear. Draft should be strong. He checked the air intake damper, making sure it moved freely, then tested the door gasket for leaks. We're good there. Now the CO alarm. They had 3 alarms, one in the sleeping loft, one by the stove, one near the generator alcove. Tom tested each one with a can of detector test spray, and all 3 screamed on cue. Batteries are fresh. Sensors are active. He reset them and added CO alarms tested to the board. If the stove backdrafts, if the generator vent leaks, if anything goes wrong, we'll know. Sarah stared at the alarm by the stove, remembering that night 3 years ago, the disorientation, the nausea, the way time had seemed to slow down as the air turned toxic. What would have happened if we skipped this? Tom didn't answer right away. He just looked at the alarm, then at the stove, then at her. We'd be asleep when it happened. Probably wouldn't wake up. They stood in silence, and the weight of it settled over them, the razor-thin margin between preparation and disaster. The way a single skipped checklist item could cascade into something irreversible. The neighbors had laughed at the wall, called them paranoid, but the neighbors had never spent a night choking on smoke, had never felt the cold certainty of realizing they'd bet their lives on an assumption and lost. We're not skipping anything, Sarah said. Not a single line. Tom nodded. Not a single line. By midnight they'd completed 12 tasks on the 72-hour checklist. The cabin was warm, the systems were verified, and the radio crackled softly in the corner with NOAA weather updates. The forecast had worsened at 224 inches now, sustained winds 50 to 70, wind chill 40 below. Blizzard warning from Sunday evening through Tuesday morning. Travel strongly discouraged. Power outages likely. Sarah lay in the sleeping loft, staring at the rafters, listening to the wind test the cabin's seams. Beside her, Tom was already asleep, breathing slow and steady. She reached for the handheld radio on the nightstand and keyed the mic. Voice low. Ridgeline to Marissa, evening check-in. How copy? Static, then Ridgeline. Marissa here. We're okay. Doug got to town, got some supplies. We're good. Sarah heard the hesitation, the unspoken uncertainty. You folks have a CO alarm. A longer pause. I don't. I think we might. I'll check. If you don't, come by tomorrow and we'll lend you one of ours. And make sure your chimney's clear, Marissa. If it's not, don't run the stove. Okay, yeah, thanks, Sarah. We've got each other's backs out here. Sleep tight. Ridgeline out. She set the radio down and closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. The wind spoke in that high, keening pitch, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she was running through the checklist, over and over, searching for the line they might have missed. The next morning, Saturday, 48 hours before the storm, the sky was the color of old concrete, and the temperature had dropped to 12 degrees. Sarah woke to the sound of Tom already up, already moving, already at the wall with his coffee and grease pencil. He'd rewritten the timeline in red. 48 hours. She climbed down the loft ladder, pulled on wool socks and a fleece, and joined him. What's next? Structure. Snow load. He tapped the ceiling. This roof's rated for 60 pounds per square foot, which is code, but code assumes regular snow. This storm's going to dump 2 feet of wet, heavy snow in a day and a half. And if we get freezing rain on top of it, we could hit 80, 90 pounds per square foot. We need to know what the roof can take, and we need a plan to shed load if it gets critical. They spent the morning outside, measuring roof pitch, checking for sag, inspecting the support beams from inside the attic crawlspace. The cabin was solid, built in the 70s by a logger who knew winter, but solid didn't mean invincible. Tom climbed onto the roof with a snow rake and marked depth limits on the gable ends with bright orange spray paint. If the snow gets above this line, we start clearing. No debate, no hesitation. Sarah staged the tool shovels, roof rake, safety lines inside the mudroom ready to grab. Tom added, roof SNOW load markers set clearing plan ready to the board. Then he turned to the woodpile. They had 2 cords of split, seasoned firewood stacked under a tarp, enough for a month of continuous burning. But accessibility was the issue. If we get 3 feet of snow, we won't be able to reach the pile without digging. We need to move a week's worth inside, now, while we can. They spent the afternoon hauling armloads of wood into the mudroom, stacking it tight, calculating burn rates. A full load every 8 hours, 3 loads a day, 7 days 168 pieces. They counted every one, because counting mattered. Assumptions killed. By evening, the wind had shifted again, blowing harder from the north, and the snow began in earnest small dry flakes that hissed against the windows. The radio announced updated advisories, winter storm warning upgraded to blizzard warning, whiteout conditions expected, travel impossible. Tom stood at the window watching the snowfall, and Sarah knew what he was thinking. They'd done everything right so far, but the storm was still 36 hours away, and there were still so many things that could break. We're going to make it, she said. He nodded slowly. If we stay sharp, if we don't get complacent. At 8 p.m., the radio check-in, Ridgeline to Marissa, evening check. How copy? Silence. Sarah tried again. Marissa, this is Ridgeline. Do you copy? More silence, then faint and crackling. Ridgeline. Doug here. Marissa, she's pretty stressed. We didn't find a sewer alarm in town. Everything's sold out. Tom took the mic. Doug, listen carefully. You need that alarm. Come by tomorrow morning, first thing, and we'll lend you one of ours. Also, when's the last time you cleaned your chimney? A long pause. I don't know. Last year, maybe. Tom's face was stone. You clean it tomorrow, before you run the stove again. You hear me? If you don't have a chimney brush, we'll lend you that too. But you do not skip this. Understand? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll come by. Good. We're here if you need us. Stay safe. Ridgeline out. Tom hung the mic and turned to Sarah. They're not ready. They're scared and they're scrambling and they're making decisions out of panic instead of process. Then we help them. Sarah crossed to the supply closet and pulled out their backup CO alarm, still in the package. We can spare this. And we walk them through the basics. It's what neighbors do. Tom looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Yet is Sunday morning 12 hours before blizzard onset the world was already transformed. 6 inches of new snow had fallen overnight, and the sky pressed low and gray, pregnant with more. The wind howled through the trees, bending them like dancers, and the temperature had plummeted to 5 above zero. Tom and Sarah worked through the final checklist items with surgical precision. They tested the battery bank fully charged, inverter functioning, all connections tight. They verified the solar panel angles, not that it mattered, given the incoming cloud cover, but preparation meant covering every variable. They staged emergency supplies in the mudroom first aid kit, spare batteries, flashlights, emergency radio, road flares. They filled every available container with water, 20 gallons in jugs, pots and buckets, because if something happened to the line, they'd need reserves. At 10 a.m., Doug and Marissa arrived, breath fogging, eyes wide. Doug carried a chimney brush they'd borrowed from someone in town, and Marissa clutched a list written on the back of an envelope. Sarah handed them the CO alarm and showed them how to test it, where to mount it, how to recognize the different alarm patterns. Tom walked Doug through the chimney cleaning process, step by step, emphasizing the danger of skipping it. Look, Tom said, his voice firm but not unkind. I know we've joked around. I know you think we're a little over the top with all this. He gestured back toward the cabin, toward the checklist wall visible through the window. But that wall, that boring, paranoid, obsessive checklist wall, is the only reason we're still here. It's the only reason we'll still be here Wednesday morning. Doug looked at the cabin, at the wall, and his expression changed, embarrassment giving way to something else. Respect, understanding. I'm sorry we laughed, he said quietly. I didn't get it. You get it now, Tom said. That's what matters. Go home, clean that chimney, mount that alarm, and stay on your radio schedule. We're all coming through this together. They left, trudging back through the snow, and Sarah stood beside Tom, watching them go. Think they'll be okay if they follow the steps? Yeah. If they don't, he shook his head. We can't force it. We can only offer what we know. By mid-afternoon, the snow was falling harder, fat, wet flakes that piled up fast. Tom rechecked the roof markers, 8 inches since morning. He grabbed the roof rake and climbed the ladder, pulling snow down in heavy cascades that thumped onto the ground. Sarah worked below, shoveling clear paths to the generator, the woodpile, the water shut off. The radio crackled. NOAA weather update. Blizzard warning now in effect. Heavy snow and dangerous winds developing this evening. Whiteout conditions after dark. Wind chill warnings. Life-threatening cold. Do not travel. Tom came down from the roof, covered in snow, and they went inside. He marked roof cleared, standby for next cycle on the board. Then he stood there, grease pencil in hand, staring at the wall. Every line had a check mark. Every task was complete. We're as ready as we can be, Sarah said. He nodded. Now we wait. The blizzard arrived at dusk like a freight train. The wind rose from a howl to a scream, hammering the cabin walls, driving snow horizontal. Visibility dropped to zero. Sarah couldn't see the woodpile from the window, couldn't see the generator shed, couldn't see anything but white chaos. The temperature plunged. 10 above, 50. The wind chill calculator on the radio said 35 below. Inside, the wood stove roared, the battery bank held steady, and the systems functioned exactly as they'd been prepared to function. Tom monitored everything: stove draft, CO readings, generator runtime, water pressure. Sarah kept the radio check-in schedule, reaching out every 6 hours, logging responses. Doug and Marissa checked in, their voices tight but present. They were okay. They'd cleaned the chimney. The alarm was mounted. They were following the steps. The snow piled up. By midnight, 16 inches. By dawn Monday, 4. The roof creaked under the load, and Tom went out with a rake every 4 hours, clearing snow in whiteout conditions, roped to the cabin, moving by feel and memory. Sarah tracked his time outside, never letting him stay longer than 15 minutes, never letting him work alone. The checklist wall had taught them this two-buddy system: time limits, verification. The generator ran flawlessly, the treated fuel flowing smooth and clean despite the sub-zero cold. The water line held, the insulated sections staying liquid, the flow uninterrupted. The wood stove burned hot and safe, the cleared flue drafting perfectly, the co-alarm silent. The roof held, the cleared snow preventing overload, the structure sound. The radio kept them connected, the scheduled check-ins a lifeline, the battery discipline preserving their link to the outside world. Every system that could have failed would have failed, without preparation held. Tom stood at the checklist wall on Monday evening, the wind still screaming outside, and traced his finger down the completed tasks. Waterline insulated, he read aloud. If we'd skipped it, the line freezes Sunday night. We're melting snow by Monday morning, rationing, maybe cutting into the emergency reserve. If the line cracks, we're done until spring, thaw, hauling all our water by sled from the spring, if we can even reach it in the snow. Sarah joined him, reading over his shoulder. Generator fuel treated and relocated. If we'd skipped it, the fuel gels in the cold Sunday night. Generator won't start. We're on battery alone, no water pump, limited lights, radios dying by Tuesday. We go dark, wood stove inspection and CO alarm test. Tom continued. If we'd skipped it, creosote buildup causes a chimney fire or backdraft. Co-alarm doesn't work because the battery's dead. We're poisoned in our sleep, or the cabin burns down, or both. Roof snow load plan, Sarah said. If we'd skipped it, the snow accumulates unchecked. By Tuesday morning, the roof sags, maybe collapses. We're buried, or exposed to the storm, fighting to survive in a broken structure. Communication schedule and radio discipline, Tom finished. If we'd skipped it, the radios die by Monday because we didn't manage power. We lose contact with the neighbors, lose weather updates, lose any chance of calling for help if something goes catastrophically wrong. We're isolated and blind. They stood in silence, staring at the wall, and the full weight of it hit them, not just what they'd done, but what they'd avoided. 5 catastrophic failures, 5 ways to die or be maimed or lose everything, all prevented by the simple, boring, obsessive discipline of following a checklist. The neighbors laughed at this, Sarah said quietly. Tom nodded. They're not laughing now. The blizzard raged through Monday night and into Tuesday morning, then finally, mercifully, began to ease. By noon, the wind dropped to a breeze, and the snow tapered to flurries. The sky lightened from charcoal to silver. The world outside was buried under 32 inches of fresh snow, sculpted into drifts and curves by the wind, silent and surreal. Tom and Sarah ventured outside, roped together, moving slowly through the deep snow. The cabin stood solid, the roof intact, the generator humming in its alcove, the water still flowing. Every system, every preparation, every line on the checklist vindicated. At 2 p.m., the radio crackled. Ridgeline, this is Doug. We made it. We're okay. Tom took the mic, his voice rough with fatigue and relief. Good to hear your voice, Doug. You folks did great. Really great. Tom, listen. Doug's voice was different, humbled, earnest. That checklist war, that whole process. You were right. We weren't ready. And you showed us how to get ready. And that's the only reason we're okay. Thank you, seriously. Thank you. Tom looked at Sarah, and she saw the emotion in his eyes. Not pride, not vindication, but something quieter. Gratitude. For the lesson learned years ago, for the discipline that kept them alive, for the neighbors who survived because they'd been willing to share what they knew. Stay on the radio schedule, Tom said. This isn't over until the road's clear and help can reach us if we need it. But we're through the worst of it. We did it together. Copied that. Dug out. Tom hung the mic and turned to the checklist wall. Sarah watched as he uncapped the grease pencil and wrote, in bold capitals across the bottom, systems held, preparation works. She stepped beside him, shoulder to shoulder, and they stood there in the warm cabin, the wood stove crackling, the snow drifted high against the windows, and the checklist wall laughed at, mocked, dismissed, standing silent and vindicated behind them. We should write this down, Sarah said. The whole process. Everything we did. People need to know this stuff. Tom nodded slowly. Yeah. Not as a sermon. Not as we're better than you. Just as here's what we learned. Here's what saved us. Here's what might save you. Sarah pulled out her phone, still charged thanks to the battery bank, and started typing notes. Then she stopped, looking up at Tom. You know what? This whole story, the storm, the checklist, the failures we prevented, people need to hear it, and not just read it. Hear it, see it, understand it. Tom raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking, a video or a series? Walking people through winter preparedness, off-grid systems, checklist, discipline, not as prepper paranoia, but as practical survival, real stories, real lessons. And you think people would watch that? Sarah smiled. I think people who almost didn't make it through a storm like this would watch it. I think people who want to live this life but don't know where to start would watch it. I think Doug and Marissa would watch it. Tom considered this, looking back at the checklist wall. Then he nodded. Okay, let's do it, but we do it right. No hype, no fear-mongering, just honest, practical, tested information, the kind of stuff that actually keeps you alive. Sarah continued typing, organizing the story, planning the structure. When she finished, she looked at Tom. You know, if we put this out there, if we share what we learned, we're going to reach people who need this. Then we owe it to them to do it well, Tom said. And we owe it to them to keep doing it. One video, one checklist, one lesson at a time. Sarah smiled, and for the first time in days, the tension in her shoulders eased. The storm was over. They'd survived. And now they had something bigger, responsibility, a mission, a way to take the hard lessons they'd learned and turn them into something that might save someone else. If this resonates with you, Sarah said, speaking now as if to a camera, to an audience, to the people who'd find this story someday. If you're thinking about off-grid living or winter preparedness or just how to build systems that keep you safe, then stick with us. Subscribe, follow along, and let's build this knowledge together. Because the truth is, we're all in this. We all face storms, literal or otherwise. And the difference between making it through and not making it through often comes down to the boring, unglamorous work of preparation, the checklists, the cross-checks, the discipline to do it right, even when no one's watching. That's not paranoia. That's survival. And if you want to learn how to do it, we're here to teach you. We'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there. Tom nodded, and together they turned back to the checklist wall, their lifeline, their teacher, their partner in survival. The neighbors had laughed. The storm had come. The checklists had held. And now, they'd share that truth with whoever needed to hear it. Because, in the end, preparation wasn't about being better than anyone else. It was about being ready when it mattered. It was about making it through together. And it was about passing that knowledge forward, so that when the next storm came, and there was always a next storm, no one had to face it alone.